Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and I'm very pleased indeed to be here. In the 1990s, there were many discussions that revealed differing views on human rights. 4 controversial issues emerged as having a bearing on the understanding of human rights. The most important arose over the question of the universality of human rights. There were those who affirmed that they had to be viewed as culturally relative. The second revolved around the primacy of communal rights over individual rights. The third touched on various policies and their conditionality on observing human rights. And the fourth dealt with the double standards, calling for the respect of human rights or selectively trying to impose them. More often than not, there was no religious controversy over human rights. Theological arguments contrasting God-given laws and human-made principles, such as the ones embodied in the Universal Declaration, lost through the years much of their prominence, even if they did not lose all their appeal. Many believed that differences could be transcended by the affirmation that human rights are derived from the very humanity and dignity of the human person. Natural theology in Christian thought and the Quranic notion of al-fitrah, natural disposition of human nature, seemed to bridge those differences. In subsequent years and until today, fostering citizenship raised a number of issues related to basic human rights. Co-citizens belong to one homeland. They are often defined by their national identity and culture rather than by their religious affiliation, even when a state's self-understanding is shaped by its religious heritage. Yet, unequal civil and religious rights, no matter how justified they are, remained a problematic reality. The affirmation of group rights associated with an unfair political representation for all citizens reinforced majority-minority divisions and mutual perceptions. In certain cases, minority rights were opposed to majority rule or even to majority aspiration. In other cases, the claims of those rights as specifically communal enclaved members of communities in their own society. Be that as it may, majority-minority relations are changing historical realities. Christians of the Arab world have been recognized as communities in law and public consciousness since the birth of Islam. The statute, or rather the pact of Dhimma, while expecting their loyalty to the Islamic State, has recognized them and protected them. This recognition was a form of acceptance or even legitimation of religious plurality at a time where it was deficient elsewhere. But such pluralism, in the sense of acceptance of plurality, was in a way a hierarchical pluralism. Beginning in the early 16th century under the Ottomans, the Dhimma system organizing pluralism reached its highest point of codification in the Millet system. During the 19th century, European powers, tempted by the Ottoman Empire's weakness and having adopted an imperialistic attitude, developed relations with various minority communities. In fact, hierarchical pluralism was exploited in favor of the needs of external domination. Christians were often faced with difficult choices that differed according to their character, religious affiliation, social condition, and the political fluctuations they experienced. But on the whole, they aspired to citizenship, freed from direct and indirect domination from abroad. While their fight for political and civil equality opposed them to the increasingly moribund Ottoman Empire, it united them with the Muslims in a national struggle for independence. For the majority of Christians, this struggle was to continue against the European nations after they had shared the spoils of the First World War. In the latter part of the 19th century and in the early 20th century, Christians played a role in shaping a new social and political order that far outweighed their numerical importance. Their contributions in culture, but also in political activity, attempted to shake loose their minority status and identity. The nation states that emerged from the empire, including modern Turkey, came as a rejection of the Ottoman past. A large number of Christians, however, were opposed to the separatist tendencies of some of their co-religionists. They opted for modern nationalist and universalizing ideologies. They emphasized their common cultural identity with Muslims as the basis of independence and modern nation building. The patriotic bond cemented opposition to the Ottoman Central Power and later to the dominating European powers. The struggle for independence, therefore, established a pact of citizenship, superseding the former Dhimma Pact. The revolution of 1919, to name Egypt, was a case in point. In Palestine, though they did not have a state, the pact of citizenship was affirmed as Christians and Muslims suffered together dispossession and ethnic cleansing. Now, the Arab uprisings or revolutions of 2011 initiated in an unanticipated manner transformations in a region that seemed resistant to change. For some time, expectations and hopes energized processes of transformation. Today's disillusionment, though understandable, is often rushed, in my view, and at times it's engineered. Disillusionment, uncertainty, and fear notwithstanding, the yearning for dignity, freedom, and political participation that has motivated revolutions against authoritarian regimes cannot be dismissed as ephemeral. But today, the weakness of state institutions grounded in the rule of law and the fragility of national cohesion and identity are exacerbated further by the rapid and unanticipated collapse of the old regional order. These developments favor a tendency to overemphasize the strength of primordial ties. Family, kin, clan, community, in comparison with the civic ties that are constitutive of modern nations and modern democratic societies. One cannot ignore the resurgence or the reinvention of subnational identities and the centrifugal forces at work in many Arab countries, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen. Many members of communities, not only religious and cultural minorities, sadly have lost their aspirations to a state for all. I was in Iraq last week, and I was dismayed by the loss of this aspiration for a state that is for all. And many beg for a power structure that can protect them from another community. Weakened states and political and electoral strategies of mobilization have accentuated communalism and encouraged the surfacing of narratives of victimhood. And in certain cases, there are competing narratives of victimhood. Revitalizing the pact of citizenship necessitates the rebuilding of the state institutions. There are no other ways. On the foundation of the rule of law, the state's chief obligation, not the community, the state's chief obligation is to protect its citizens, all its citizens. And politics of inclusion in fractured societies are a condition for equal citizenship. Inclusion, not exclusion. We had an argument with some of our Iraqi friends where I dared to say, you may defeat Daesh militarily, and I will in Mosul in the next 2-3 weeks. But then, what politics of inclusion do you have in mind so that there won't be other fertile grounds for other radical movements, whatever they call themselves? 2 weeks ago, Sheikh al-Azhar, Dr. Ahmad al-Tayyib, convened a major Muslim-Christian conference on citizenship, freedom and diversity. Ma'ali Sheikha and myself were there. At the end of it, he issued a seminal, I think it's a seminal declaration. I won't read it to you, but I'll sum it up. Faithful to the method of ta'sil, that is rooting a principle in Islamic soil, as it were, he starts by stating that the concept of citizenship has its origin in Islam. More particularly in the constitution of Al-Madinah, where Muslims and non-Muslims are one nation, ummatun min duni nas. He denounced, Sheikh al-Azhar, every practice that contradicts today the principle of citizenship, affirming that the national and constitutional state, that is a state based on the rule of law, established on the principle of citizenship equality, excludes the notion of a contract between communities and excludes the notion of minority. It's been said before, under the protection of the majority. He warned against the excessive use of the concept of minority, implying discrimination and even separation under the pretext of granting minority rights. In a context where minority-centered concerns are on the rise, emigration of Christians, whether forced or voluntary, reaching unprecedented levels, in the midst of mounting fears and uncertainties, the statements of Al-Azhar gain greater significance and timeliness. In opposing fragmentation of our societies, they point to policies different from what we see in most Arab countries. And let's hope that these policies will contribute, these ideas of Al-Azhar contribute to a change in policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you.